Hi, everyone. It's Jessica Stone at Stansberry Research, and I'm joined by Amanda Cuocci of Stansberry's Health and Wealth Bulletin. And Amanda, we are seeing so much information flood the airwaves about COVID-19, so many studies that I frankly don't know what to believe when I find things that don't mesh or some things contradict each other. I think there's a lot of confusion at a time when we need a lot of clarity. And you have written about that clarity that you would like to help provide 5 steps to cut through COVID media hype. What first of all would you say about the information that's out there? Why is so much of it contradictory?
So I think this is a great question and a good topic to address right now. I'm seeing so many people sharing, these outrageous news stories, and they really don't have the scientific backing that we need. So we put together at Health and Wealth Bulletin a list of 5 points, like you mentioned. And I think part of the problem we're seeing right now is that, this is a novel virus. We haven't seen it before. We're still trying to figure out if it acts more like, the seasonal coronaviruses that we see every, cold and flu season, if it's going to act more like SARS and MERS and it'll just burn out and we won't see it again. So I think a lot of people are just trying to figure out this puzzle, and sometimes findings contradict each other.
So there's a lot of studies that people are writing about. What are some key things that we can be looking at when we see an article that's based on a study in order to ascertain how to put it into context?
First 2 points on our list, 2 things that everyone can look for, is the idea of risk and the idea of other factors that might influence the outcome. So when I talk about risk, and I'm not going to get too deep in the details here, this is something that Doc Eifrig has written about a lot, so I would go check out what he's already said on it. But there's absolute risk and there's relative risk. The basic level of that is relative risk is the difference between the 2 groups in the study. So like a medication group and a placebo group. That difference in outcome is relative risk. But when you apply that risk to the general population, that's absolute risk. So that's more like what you're going to face as a person in the world with all kinds of other stuff coming at you.
I wanted to bring up the topic of correlation versus causation. These are sort of not everyday words that we use, but correlation is when 2 things happen at the same time. Causation is when one thing happens and it makes another thing happen. Those are things that we can find out about these studies because there are studies that use both of those terminologies. I guess I would ask you as a scientist, which of those studies is stronger? Which should we put more credence into, a correlation study or a causation study?
Causation studies, 100%. There are some studies out there where correlations are completely crazy. I think one of Doc's favorite is, there's a correlation in the amount of butter consumed in the state of Maine and the divorce rate, right? Just because they follow the exact same plot doesn't mean that one causes the other. I mean, hopefully you're not going to get divorced because your spouse is eating too much butter, but that's something to illustrate that causation sometimes happens together, but really you need a mechanism of action study. And that's why some of these studies are very important, even though they might seem boring or they're not getting a lot of the media press. Anything that's studying the ACE2 receptors, that's where we know the virus attaches. That's how it's causing these problems. So trying to understand that and looking for things like mechanism of action and causation in a study paper is really important.
If we know that a study is just at the beginning stages, because that should be in the article, let's face it, it should be. Should we even really continue reading it? I mean, how valuable could it be if it's not been peer reviewed or vetted in some other way?
The problem with COVID is that it's so rapid and a lot of the research is coming out quickly to try to help people. Some of those steps are getting missed, or, like you said, reporters are reporting on things that are still in the early stages. We can't really know if those are verifiable outcomes. I think one of the things that we do at Health and Wealth Bulletin is we do check the journal standing. So, certain journals like The Lancet and Cell and the Journal of the American Medical Association, New England Journal of Medicine, those are like the gold standard journals. And you can find, I think I have a link in the Health and Wealth Bulletin issue we did on this, where you can search the journal and see where they are in the rankings. So that should give you some credence. And, if it's in preprint, pre-production, hasn't gone through peer review, just take it with a grain of salt. See if it adds to the already known knowledge, or if it's brand new. If it's brand new, you really want to be careful with it.
Yeah, because outliers make headlines, but they don't necessarily help us make good medical decisions, right?
Absolutely.
How can we find out about who pays for a study? That's another topic you bring up. Is obviously,
Mhm.
whoever pays for it has a stake in the outcome. So how is that? How can we find that out when we're reading about a study in medical science?
Absolutely. So I think this is really critical because, a lot of studies are funded by the industries they're helping, like olive oil studies, for instance. We wrote about olive oil a few years ago. And so many of them were funded by the California Olive Oil Association. So how can you really trust, what's coming out of that? Fortunately, for good journals, especially the ones on the list that I mentioned, they will have a section in the paper where the authors have to declare any competing interests. So then you just kind of have to use that. That's something really you need to be aware of.
All right, Amanda Cuocci, always a pleasure. Thanks for helping us cut through the COVID media hype. I hope that people will also go to the article that you've written about this and review that list that you mentioned. That seems to be a really good list to keep in mind as we read and take in so much information about COVID-19. And if you would like to see much more content just like this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, you can also find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. That's all for now.